Welcome to the Southern Ohio Synod podcast. I am Pastor Connie Mentzer, and I serve as Assistant to the Bishop for Discipleship, Leadership, and Engagement, which means I'm responsible for candidacy and ministry discernment. I am so glad you have joined us for our episode today.
During the months between college and graduate school, I worked in the fast food industry. I was at the front counter of the restaurant, so I was face to face with the customers. The restaurant was close to several trucking distribution centers. One day, during the lunch rush, two customers placed their order with me. I repeated and confirmed the order, gave them the total due, and accurately counted back their change. They looked at me, and one of them said, "Wow, you're almost smart enough to work for us on the trucking docks." To them, I was simply the mechanism that delivered the product, their food, to them. My labor was included with the price of the burger and fries. For those fast food customers, their understanding of money shaped how they saw me at that moment. I was a means to be used for the purpose of getting their food. When Christians talk about the spiritual discipline of giving, we talk about the impact that money and how we view it has on us, the impact of money on our allegiances, the impact of money on our relationships with others, and, most importantly, the impact of money on our relationship with God. When engaging in the Christian discipline of giving, we are reminded that all things come from God. These things are gifts for us to use, not for us to possess. We learn how to give thanks for what we have. When we engage in the Christian discipline of giving, we don't idolize things over God, and we don't see people as mere resources to be used to get what we want. This podcast looks at the spiritual discipline of giving and how it changes the way we look at, use, and value money and things. What we do is an outcome of our faith. There is disagreement among Christians on the importance of faith and faithful works. Some Christian traditions ground themselves in the belief that it is through the grace of God, seen in the death of Jesus on the cross, that sets them right with God. Other Christian traditions will focus heavily on the actions performed by the believers, that if they do the right things, then they will have a right relationship with God. It's as if Romans 5:1, which reads, "Therefore, since we are justified by faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ," is set in opposition to James 2:14, which reads, "What good is it, my siblings, if you say you have faith, but do not have works? Can faith save you?" In this either-or mentality of our nation right now, I want to propose a both-and approach. Faith and works are both significant in the life of the disciples of Jesus. Faith is still primary and the most important one of the two. However, one must ask, is my faith alive? Is it vital and vibrant and life-giving? A faith that is vital and vibrant and life-giving will bear fruit. And one of the fruits of faith is the faithful and right use of money. Acts of giving are acts that come out of a vital, vibrant, and life-giving faith. As Martin Luther is said to have said, "Good deeds don't make for a good person, but a good person does good deeds." Luther also states, "God does not need your good works, but your neighbor does." The spiritual discipline of giving is a good work that comes out of our faith in God. Giving is an outcome of Christian character. The "What Would Jesus Do" movement was strong when I was in college. Many people were wearing the yellow wristbands that had the letters WWJD, standing for "What Would Jesus Do?" The goal, each time a person was faced with a decision, the person was to ask themselves how Jesus would handle it, and then respond in the same way. The end game is the belief that if all people were responding the way Jesus would, then the world would be changed. Now, Jesus certainly gives us a fine example of how to live. But if he is seen as nothing more than the perfect role model that we all must emulate perfectly, then he places the burden of condemnation upon our shoulders, since we will never achieve that perfection. When that happens, then Jesus doesn't set us free, and there's no need for the grace and mercy of God. 16 of the 38 parables told by Jesus addresses money and faithful use of money. Now, some have hypothesized that Jesus talked about money more than faith or love. That may be the case, but this does not mean that money is more important than faith or love. It does mean that how we value and use money affects our relationship with God, and it has an impact on being a good neighbor, forgiving one's neighbor, and caring for one's neighbor. For when one's relationship with God is not right, then one's relationship with others isn't right. We also read in 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 10, "For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil, and in their eagerness to be rich, some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pains." Now please note, it does not say here that money is the root of all evil. In fact, Jesus gives direction in how to use money for the work of the kingdom of God. It is the love of money that is said to be the root of evil, especially when a person loves money more than they love God. When money is prioritized over one's faith in God, then contentment is believed to be found not in one's relationship with God, but in what money can accomplish for them. If how we view and use money shapes our relationship with God, our relationships with others, and our relationship with things, then a discipline of how to use money is an important part of one's discipleship. Our life experiences shape the way we see and value money. When I met with couples for premarital counseling, I invited them into a conversation about money. Now, while it's not backed up by scientific study, I do believe that how money is used by each person in a marriage will be one of the greatest sources of conflict and fights in that marriage. Once I was meeting with a couple. Both of them believe that it is important to think about how their money is used. After further conversation, the couple realized that while they agreed that how money was used was important, they realized the reasons for making money important were not the same for both of them. For one, who came from a financially comfortable family, money was important to maintain that comfort, increase that comfort, and to indulge a bit along the way. For the other, who came from a family that was poor, money was important because it was necessary to count every penny in order to provide the basic necessities of life. Another couple I worked with did not share the same level of concern about money and job loss and its impact on income. One of them, whose father was a blue-collar worker, grew up in a house where there was fear of the father losing his job. She continually worried that something would happen in her upcoming marriage that would put them at the same risk. So she pinched every penny. The groom was raised in a white-collar family with parents who had job security. He didn't worry about job loss and spent money much more freely. Our life experiences shape how we see, value, and use money. Since discipleship involves all of who we are, our bodies, minds, souls, values, and habits, discipleship involves how we see and use our money. Having been saved through the death and resurrection of Jesus and having our relationship with God restored through God's mercy and grace, how we live, including how we spend money, is shaped by that relationship with God. It is also important to note that the experiences we have with money that shape our perception and value of money can easily become for us the one true and right way to think about money. To have those experiences and beliefs challenged can cause quite a bit of dissonance for a person. The spiritual discipline of giving challenges our experiences and values associated with money. And the spiritual discipline of giving helps people make faithful use of money in a way that reflects their faith in God. Money is connected with power and control. There once was a wealthy woman who had most of her money invested in a local bank. One year, there was a professional sporting event in the town where she lived. Her bank was offering tickets to the event for their larger investors. She requested 4 tickets to the event. The bank informed her that she could only have 2 tickets. She told the bank that if she didn't get 4 tickets, she would move her money to another bank. The bank gave her 6 tickets. Simply put, money gives power and control. Consider the benefits of having money. We can travel wherever we want. We can see whatever doctor we want to see. We can buy any type of clothes we desire. We can eat whatever we want. We can eat wherever we want to eat. We can choose what gifts we give to others. We can determine which cause is important and give to them. Without financial resources, we may actually have to make choices between the benefits that I just listed. For example, there are people who have to make a choice between using their money for medication or buying food. I also want to point out that issues of social concern have a greater impact on those with less financial resources. For example, with rising ocean levels, beachfront is eroding in many places. Those with money can move to a climate and setting that is not impacted by the climate change. Those with limited resources will not have that freedom, and so they will have to endure the wrath of hurricanes, flooding, and tornadoes. Money gives us power and control over our lives. So how does giving change our mindset of money being used for power and control? First, giving to the church is giving to God. So we are turning power and control over to the Lord of heaven and earth. Second, giving to the church means giving up control of how the money is used. Now, while some of us want to designate where our money is used in a church, general giving to God through the church is about turning over control of that money and how it's used and trusting the leaders of the church to make right decisions about its use. And third, giving to God through the church calls us to remember that all we have, all of our possessions, are gifts from God for our use. For those reasons, giving to God through the church is a discipline that helps us learn how to give up power and control. Giving is a spiritual discipline that addresses the desire for things. A pastor once made this observation: I have never seen a hearse pulling a U-Haul trailer. Beyond the absurdity and the humor, there's a truth revealed in that. You see, we lay claim to owning and possessing our things. Yet, in the frailty of human life, we need to be reminded that we have not always possessed our things. We will not always possess those things, and quite frankly, most of what we own at the moment was not ours before we were born. In her book, Thoughts Matter, Mary Margaret Funk speaks about the spiritual impact of money. She points out that money is important to us because we like our things. Not only do we like our things, but we also claim to be entitled to our things and to own them. For her, owning things is a spiritual illusion. She writes, from a spiritual point of view, owning anything is an illusion. At best, all we do is use a thing. However, we desire, obtain, use, and secure more and more things. This getting of things tends to fan the fire of desire to get more things the next time. Things are seductive, she says, even more seductive than sex. It is important to note the things are not the problem, but our attachment to those things is what is problematic. When we claim to own and possess things, the relationship we have with our possessions does not necessarily include God. Funk goes on to write, since it is an illusion to own anything, the proper relationship with things is to use them with the permission and guidance of the Creator. We use things reverently rather than to own them. So how do money and things connect? Money is seen as important because money is what helps us get things. Funk writes, amassing things is a learned behavior, not a natural instinct. And if it's learned, it can be unlearned. This notion that amassing things through the use of money is a learned behavior indicates that there is a discipline, a spiritual discipline that can help us unlearn that behavior. Giving to God through the church is that spiritual discipline that helps us unlearn that behavior. Giving to God through the church challenges covetousness. In Thoughts Matter, Mary Margaret Funk addresses the spiritual impact of the love of money. She states, the love of money as a means to get the things we desire has a spiritual impact. The spiritual impact begins with this logic. What I have currently is insufficient. It cannot provide me with a sound mind and sturdy body. Therefore, I need more money to get more things to ensure my well-being. Listen to Martin Luther's explanation of the petition of the Lord's Prayer, which states, "Give us this day our daily bread." Luther writes, in fact, God gives daily bread without our prayer, even to all evil people. But we ask in this prayer that God cause us to recognize what our daily bread is and to receive it with thanksgiving. In short, praying for daily bread reminds us that what we need comes from God. To recognize the difference between what we need and what we want, and to give thanks for what we have. Giving thanks is the primary spiritual tool to fighting temptation. By giving thanks for what we have, we aren't tempted to think we need more things, and even worse, to think that we deserve more things. Based on the value statement of, I deserve what I want, Money is the tool by which I can provide for myself what I believe I deserve. Funk says, money then becomes one's God. So instead of worshiping God, a person worships idols acquired by money. In doing so, the qualities of Christian character, humility, charity, and obedience, are looked down upon instead of lifted up as qualities of a disciple of Jesus. In Exodus chapter 16, verses 4 to 5, we hear of God's people yearning for something to eat. Well, complaining they didn't have anything to eat. But anyway, we hear this response from God. Then the Lord said to Moses, I am going to rain down bread from heaven for you, and each day the people shall go out and gather enough for that day. And that way I will test them whether they will follow my instruction or not. On the sixth day, when they prepare what they bring in, it will be twice as much as they gather on other days. Now please note, the people were only to gather what they needed for that one day, that God will provide each and every day. On the sixth day, they were to gather for 2 days, for the seventh day was Sabbath, and they were not to labor for food on that day. Later in that same chapter, we hear these words from God. In the morning you shall have your fill of bread, and then you shall know that I am the Lord your God. Receiving daily bread is a spiritual discipline that calls one's attention to the one true God. In writing to the monastic community centuries ago, John Cassian lifts up the vow of poverty that monks make when they become part of the community. God, through the monastery, would give the monk whatever he needed to live. Cassian believed certain things would happen to monks who had money, and included in that list, monks who had money would consider leaving the monastic community. They would consider themselves as a guest who is to be served instead of a member of the community engaged in serving. They would resent when something is given to someone else who has no money. They would refuse to do any work and find fault with the work that other people are doing. They would look for opportunities to be offended and angry. They would sow seeds of discontent, trying to get others to their way of thinking. They would become so focused on what they want that they will not engage in any of the other spiritual disciplines. They would daydream of what they used to have or what they want in the future. They would want more than what is necessary to live each day. Cassian tells us that the Christian tradition teaches that we cannot put an end to our desire for things by having a large or small sum of money. We can only put an end to that desire through that of renunciation. Giving generously is an act of renunciation. This renunciation comes by giving thanks for what one has, by seeing that one has all one needs, by centering oneself on daily bread, by challenging the notion that acts of service can take the place of giving money, and by denying the expectation that one's money gives them control over the congregation. Engaging in these renunciations reorients a person away from desire of things toward the desire of God. The story of creation in Genesis calls us to see all that we have for our daily needs are gifts from God to be used for God's purposes in the world. Unfortunately, the story of creation in Genesis gets hijacked. The battle over the story of creation is usually about whether it's an accurate portrayal of how the world was created. This perspective pits science against the Bible. In fighting that battle, we overlook two powerful truths that come from the story. First, the story of creation took shape when God's people had been taken into exile. They lost their homes, their temple, their worship life, their language, and their traditions. Their lives were overwhelmed with the chaos of being held captive. The story of creation is a powerful story told to them in exile, which makes this powerful claim: God can bring order out of chaos. Second, the story of creation shows the believer the generosity of God and the role of the human as they receive God's generosity. After hearing all the things that God created, we hear that God placed humanity in the midst of that abundant and beautiful creation, and humanity would, in that creation, have all that they needed to live. Their role? To simply tend and make sure that what God gave them was used to God's purposes. The truth in the creation account is that God provides, and humans are to tend to what God provides. So what does living in God's world as people of God look like? First, we find contentment in being in a relationship with God, not in having more things. We see all our possessions as gifts for our daily living and to be used to serve God. We give thanks for those gifts, for in doing so, we fight the temptation of wanting more. We see that in God's economy, we are placed in relationship with all people. Our well-being is directly connected with the well-being of others, so that when others do well, we do well. We see that poverty is not a value judgment of a person's work ethic or worth, but a failure of the community to be satisfied with their daily bread. We see that we are responsible for making sure others receive and have their daily bread, and to make sure no one deprives them of their daily bread. We see that humans are not capital to be used to make money for others. And we see a value of a person that is not determined by their bank accounts or the number of possessions they have, but that they are children of God. We see our money and our wealth to be used for God's purposes in the world. And we see that in sacrifice and giving thanks, that they are powerful spiritual disciplines that encourage the Christian qualities of humility, generosity, and obedience. I'm preparing this podcast in the weeks leading up to Christmas. Preparing this podcast is one of the tasks on my mind. The other task is Christmas shopping, that age-old process of getting gifts for others. I don't have a high need to receive gifts for Christmas, for I don't take my greatest joy in that. My greatest joy comes from watching others open the gifts that I got for them. It is my hope that they will find joy and pleasure in what I gave them. In this season, when we battle over the line, Jesus is the reason for the season, I recall my wife's challenge to that statement. She states, Jesus isn't the reason for the season. You are. Isn't that what the angels told the shepherds? For you is born this day in the city of David, a Savior who is Christ the Lord. For you. Engaging in the spiritual discipline of giving draws us back to that fundamental belief that all that we have, all that we are, and all that we hope to be comes from Jesus' death and resurrection. From the text of the hymn, "We Give Thee But Thine Own" by William Howe, we hear, "The captive to release, to God the lost to bring, to teach the way of life and peace. That's the Christ-like thing."
This is Pastor Rebecca Great, the media ambassador and storyteller for the Southern Ohio Synod. And I want to thank you again for joining us for this podcast episode. There is a discussion guide available for this podcast that is located on the Synod's website and in the description box for this episode on our YouTube channel. We hope this helps congregations and ministries be able to use this information with your councils and your other ministry leaders to help us all grow in our discipleship. If you have questions about any of the content or want to continue the conversation, you can connect with Pastor Tim Mentzer by sending him an email. His email address is tmentzer@southernohiosynod.org. Until the next time we gather on this podcast, remember that we are stronger and better together, joining Jesus in the restoration of the world.